Hello and welcome to the first edition of Standard Bank Talks with Funeka Montjane. And with me today, I have guest Sizwe and Mpofu-Walsh, and I have the CEO and my boss, Funeka Montjane, in the middle, and I have Zulaikha Patel joining us on a discussion about South Africa, the youth. It comes just a week after probably the most important election since, let me move away from 94, since maybe this is the biggest change in the country since 1976. Anxiety is a big word when it comes to the state of not only the youth. I think myself as an older gentleman, anxiousness is a thing not only locally, globally. But I want to start with you, Funeka, and just your thoughts on this time we're in this, things are going to change, like you're not in this country, and just your thoughts on the position we're in South Africa right now.
No, firstly, thank you very much for convincing me to do this. For us introverted people, we generally like not to talk to people, but it's actually quite an important conversation to have. And so thank you for doing this, and also to everybody at Standard Bank who's going to be participating in this, just to invite everybody into the dialogue. Interesting times, you know, election in South Africa, election in India, election looming at the end of the year in the US with everything with the run-up. You get a sense that there's something that's changing, you know, and I guess it's inevitable. I think that one gets a sense that there's a general dissatisfaction with the status quo, and people are looking for something different, and what different is still in construction.
Sizwe, as a starting point, your take on where we are now?
I think it's a moment of tremendous fear and tremendous hope all wrapped into one. And I think we shouldn't let the anxiety of the present moment cloud the significant opportunities that also present themselves to think different, to do things new, to find avenues for accountability. And so I'm noticing a lot of fear, I'm noticing a lot of anxiety, but I'm also happy. I'm happy that we have this moment to renew our country truly. And just as we have, you know, produced an election result that has shocked both the world and ourselves, I think we can also produce an outcome that shocks ourselves and the world in a good way. And so I'm just as interested in the opportunities of this moment as the fears and anxieties that are ever present.
Zulaikha, happy with the changes, or where do you sit on the spectrum?
My views on where we are positioned as a country aren't quite different from Sizwe's. I think what's happened is we're seeing that this is an opportunity to create change which people have been asking for the past 30 years in our country, and the opportunity presents itself now. Majority of the voters are young black people, and they've spoken through their ballots, and their ballots have reflected a dire need for change, and change in terms of they have seen what the country has looked like in our democratic dispensation for the past 30 years, and they're requesting a change socially, economically. And so I think that we shouldn't be afraid, as much as we're heading into times which we aren't used to, which are totally different from the norm that we're used to. But then again, change is meant to be uncomfortable. The only way you truly change society is through discomfort. So we should embrace the discomfort, and I think we should be pivoting ourselves in a direction of actually embracing the change that's yet to come.
Let me carry on with you. I mean, I always challenge people on the lens through which we look at South Africa. I guess for a long time, the lens we have is a very negative lens about how people view South Africa and its prospects. So in your sense, these changes, do they present more, as you say, an opportunity for us to almost readjust?
Absolutely. It presents an opportunity for us to reshift our lens in terms of how we view our country and how the world and the continent views our country. It gives us that opportunity because through the change we're headed into, we're giving ourselves an opportunity to almost redefine South Africa, because we're redefining the political arena in South Africa, and South Africa will never be the same after this point. So it definitely gives us that opportunity to completely redefine our country, and so we should be shifting our lens in how we view our country.
Sizwe, I mean, I know some political parties call 2024 our 1994. I don't know whether you agree with that or not. What's your take on just 2024 and us going for it?
It's a fascinating moment in our history because it's roughly 50 years since 1976 and it's 30 years since democracy. And so we have those two vantage points from which to look at it from this June. I don't think it's our 1994. I think it's something completely different. And in some ways, I get what people are trying to say with that it's a crucial moment and it's turned on an election. But I think we actually need to move away from constantly referencing that 94 moment. And I think that's been part of what's been wrong with South Africa, is that we think that the high watermark of our achievements are 94 and we can never actually break beyond that. And I think now we have an opportunity to break beyond the strictures of the old mythology and seek something new. What that new thing is still uncertain. It's still not determined. But I think I agree with you. It seems like we only have two settings in South Africa, euphoria and hysteria. And the fact of the matter is that the truth usually lies somewhere in between. So I'm not going to get too euphoric, nor am I going to get too hysterical. I think we have what it takes to muddle our way through and avoid catastrophe, and probably will also avoid the perfect ideal outcome too, as we often do. But we'll survive.
What are you worried about? What are you guys worried about? What is top of mind for you guys?
Two things are top of mind. One is political instability and chronic instability. If we think we've seen political instability so far, I think the last 5 years will be a bring and bri compared to what could happen. New presidents, new governments rising and falling. I'm also concerned about social stability or instability. I think in this moment there are any number of fires that could be lit near gunpowder that could present chronic social instability. So we need to steer a course away from that. But I am also worried about not making bold changes. I think this is a moment to do bold things. And if all we do as a country is just stay right where we are and not take any risks, I think that will also present long-term disappointment. So that's my view. But
I think one of the things at the top of my mind that I'm quite concerned about is, with all the change happening and with change comes discomfort, top of my mind is the most vulnerable people and where all these changes that are yet to take place will position them, and the most vulnerable people being the unemployed youth. And as you know, we have an extremely high, staggering percentage of unemployed young people in our country, and I'm quite concerned on where they will be positioned. Will there be any advancements for young people in this country, and particularly young people who are vulnerable? And other than my concern for young people is, I'm quite concerned as well about the administration we head into as well, if there will be any significant political change around certain issues that have plagued us for decades, issues around higher education, and higher education being something that is deemed as a privilege, which is not accessible to every single South African young person. Things such as our economy and the state our economy finds itself in, and at large the challenges we've been facing, such as load shedding, and if there's really going to be significant change from our political parties, and if there is that political will to bring about significant change. Because I mean, it's quite interesting to have political parties all want to change the political party that's the ruling party, and have those back and forth conversations amongst themselves. But once that's done, is there political will to significantly bring about tangible societal changes, and changes that advance the most vulnerable people in this country?
Some of us went to Model C schools and got indoctrinated, and this is how you should behave. Ron, you should play rugby, or the case may be. And you were one who stood out for the first time and said, this is not who I am, and these rules don't represent that. What do you think of your generation and that movement since 2016, when you were 13, I think, yeah?
I am not the movement. In fact, the movement is bigger and beyond me, because at the core of the movement, yes, everyone can classify it as a hair movement, a movement for expression, but at the core of it, it seeks to address something that is still deeply attached to South Africa's DNA, which is systemic racism, which we have not gotten over as a country, which is why people also this time around have voted for change. Their ballots expressed a dire need for change, because for the past 30 years, one thing that's been very clear is that we've seen the tangible remnants that colonialism and the previous system of apartheid have left behind, which is why we can all relate to talking about having undergone a certain indoctrination and a certain forced assimilation to whiteness through going through the former Model C, former white-only schools, right? And so since that movement, it was the start of addressing what is at the core of South Africa's socio-economic issues, which is race. We live in a country where your entire life's outcome is solely dependent on your race. The only time it's not dependent on your race is if you have economic means to make it out of that. And if you do not have economic means, your entire life's outcome is dependent on your race. And that was what was at the core of the movement, addressing systemic racism. And so since then, I think that movement gave my generation, Gen Z, a voice in terms of becoming open and direct and vocal around socioeconomic issues, especially around race. And I don't think my generation is one that is complacent and one that is afraid to speak and one that is afraid of change as well. I believe my generation since then has been given a voice and is quite radical and robust in vocalizing their voice and their opinions. So I think that movement sparked something that is even beyond myself as someone who formed part of co-founding the movement, and it's even beyond what was at the core of the movement. It essentially gave my generation a voice.
Just your take, Funeka, on sort of the corporate world and how that has changed. You've been in Standard Bank for 18 years, right?
Since my 18th year.
18th year. And I'm sure when you walked into this building to where it is now, it's vastly changed. Yeah. Just your take on that journey and what you think going forward.
Yeah. So I mean, three things. The first one is that the reasons why I'm still here for the last 18 years are exactly the same reasons why I joined. I really wanted to be part of an organization that sees itself as a citizen of the Republic and of the continent. And that, yes, our responsibility is to give good returns to the investors, who happen to be teachers, nurses, policemen, ordinary people who are working, who need to retire and need to get an adequate return. But that those people, they want their money to be used to create change in society. And so I wanted to work for an organization that gets that and needs to bring practical effect to that. So over the last 18 years, I have seen, I would say, a portfolio of shared value increase. I've also seen tremendous improvement in terms of diversity in our organization, in terms of Black people, in terms of women, in terms of, which is very close to my heart, our colleagues from Africa regions. Remember, I'm a Thabo Mbeki generation, you know. My identity is not being only a Xhosa woman. I'm an African woman. I'm a woman first, but I'm an African. So the opportunity to see the Africa being this bank not become a South African bank, but to become a truly Pan-African bank, and seeing unbelievable colleagues from the continent, it's been that. So that's what it's been, a growth in the portfolio of shared value, in tremendous amounts of diversity, in all sense, and then this sense of hope that we could do things that can create impact.
Africa as a continent has a young demographic, an advantage. It is an advantage compared to the rest of the world. But we spoke about the structural fault lines with the continent. So where do we begin to almost take advantage of where we sit as a continent?
There are really two double questions that we need to juggle at the same time. The one is the question of democracy on the continent. And I think this recent election in South Africa has been a great stride forward, not just for the country, but for the continent, to the extent that we've seen how an important and powerful country acts when power is lost. And I think we can all agree, no matter how we voted, that it was a great thing to see a head of state accept a resounding electoral defeat. So the question for me is, how do we consolidate that democratic culture, which is inherently African? Democracy in many ways comes from Africa, and we have always had democratic traditions within our various cultures. And how do we carefully craft a democratic culture on the continent? Or do we go in the other direction and lose some of the democratic gains that have been made? While doing so, how do we carve out a certain space for economic independence? Because that for me is the real goal. The goal is not just prosperity, if that prosperity is always contingent on someone else granting it to you. I think when you look at Asia, when you look even to some extent at Latin America, when you go further back into history to North America, what they were able to craft for their societies, large societies, was not just prosperity, but also a certain amount of independence. So how do we get Africa to the point where we are able to come to the negotiating table and call what shots are possible to be called and not be dictated to?
Your lens on South Africa going forward and your sense of hope. I'll start with you, Zulaikha, and then end off with Funeka.
I would like to be quite hopeful in terms of the future of our country. As someone that has taken up the mission to form part of transforming the country and transforming the world at large, I'd like to remain hopeful because someone I look up to, Thomas Sankara, says that at the end of the day, in order to create change, one must have a bit of madness in them. So I'm just paraphrasing that, and I think that we should be hopeful with the fact that in our country, as much as we're heading into times that we're not certain of, we're heading into a time that we've never found ourselves in before. But we should remain hopeful because at the end of the day, we are at an advantage as a country. We have a large number of young people who form part of the majority of the demographic. And at the end of the day, outside of just having young people, those young people are not just complacent. They're not just young people who don't have voices. They're not young people that are not equipped with ideas. We have such a high percentage of graduates that have studied into postgrad as well, that are not just sitting with undergraduate degrees. These people have ideas. So we find ourselves at an advantage, a greater advantage than other countries is we have young people who have ideas, young people that are equipped with qualifications that have given them these ideas, and we sit with that. So at the end of the day, I believe that no matter what happens in South Africa will never find itself in a place where there are no ideas, there is no will to create change in our society. There is no one that is a voice in transforming our country. We have that, and it's up to us to actually make use of that.
We need a clear-eyed hope, mindful of the potential dangers that also lie ahead. There are some things that really give me hope, and just stories that restore one's hope even in all the noise. And one of them was just watching South Africans in those voting lines. Just seeing that collective shared spirit, even though we were all in different places, that we fought for this and we will make our mark, no matter if that's at 3 a.m. in the morning. And particularly young people at places like Wits and different universities, staying in those lines no matter what. I thought that was just the most remarkable, hopeful moment in our country. And those are the people who have given us this window. When you look at periods of dramatic change in history, they happen in windows, for good or bad. And we now have a window that we haven't had for 30 years. And that window should give us great hope because we can do things now that we weren't able to do for a generation. Now the question is, do we seize that opportunity or do we squander it? And the hope that I live with is that we can seize that. We have seized windows before. There was a window in the late 80s and we seized it. So I'm hopeful that something is possible now. But we have to make it happen. And if we surrender our agency to big politicians or other people, then we don't perform the role we played in those lines when we realize that each voice counts. So if we can do that, I'm hopeful that we will go into a new era of prosperity and justice. And I really hope that happens.
Very hopeful for the future, starting particularly with these two young people and young people throughout this country, young people throughout the continent. My hope is that we give them a bigger voice, because the world look at us and say Africans have a population dividend. But truth be told, I'm not sure that Africans actually like young people. I think that that's one of the biggest things that we need to do, is to open up a dialogue, an intergenerational dialogue of seriousness, as opposed to, oh, Bangani, they're going to see the future, so to speak. So that's the one big thing that I'm hoping for. And I'm really hoping that that the work that happens in public sector, private sector, that is seen with the seriousness that it deserves, that it's ultimately about really creating a world that is beyond what we get today, that we create a better world for our children and our great-grandchildren.
How important is Standard Bank to the future prosperity?
How I've always viewed financial services is that I think that they play a very critical role in society, especially in terms of the economy as well. And Standard Bank being a large group on the continent and having its footprint across the continent is one that plays a very large role in terms of shaping where we're headed as a country and where we're headed as a continent, and also positioning young people in a place whereby young people can find themselves within the group, and young people are able to also find themselves in terms of being able to shape certain things taking place that would change the economy. And so I think that we're also sitting now with the question on, now that we're heading into a totally different government that we've never seen before, which is a coalition government, is there's a large question that's sitting on a lot of people's tables, is what happens with the markets, what happens with investment on the continent. And I think that we need to rethink and redefine where our lens is focused in terms of how do we create a conducive environment? How do we create an environment that's conducive for the economy? Who should we be having as investors in our country, as investors in the continent? And I think that this is a critical time where I think groups such as Standard Bank should find a voice in terms of having a voice on actually stating that if Africa as a continent was to rope together and pull together in the various regions, and if we could find ourselves in terms of investing back into each other and using each other as an advantage, then we could find ourselves in a better position economically.
All right.
Africans doing business with each other.
Yes, absolutely.
The Angolans buying beef from Botswana as opposed from Portugal.
Yep. That's critical to everything. So, thanks so much for joining us, Sizwe. Thank you, Zulaikha. Thanks so much for coming through.